Four Weddings and a Funeral begins with a man who is charming enough to drift through other people's love stories while avoiding his own. Charles is funny, intelligent, and good company in small bursts, but when commitment moves from theory to reality, he starts backing away before anyone can expect too much from him. The movie follows him and his circle of friends through a string of ceremonies that are supposed to celebrate order, romance, and permanence. Instead, each event exposes how unpredictable love really is, how often timing ruins what feeling begins, and how one reluctant man slowly discovers that dodging real emotion is just another way of being lonely. The first wedding begins in total chaos, which already tells you what kind of romantic hero Charles is going to be. He wakes up late in his London flat, scrambles into clothes, and races off with his deaf brother David to a countryside wedding already half lost before it has properly started. Charles is surrounded by a close group of friends who all seem to orbit marriage with different levels of fascination and dread. There is Fiona, who has loved Charles quietly for years while pretending that friendship is enough. There is Tom, easygoing and rich enough to act as if life will somehow sort itself out. There is Scarlett, extravagant, glamorous, and impossible to imagine becoming ordinary. There is Gareth, warm, huge-hearted, and full of the kind of openness Charles never manages. And beside Gareth is Matthew, quieter, watchful, and perfectly matched to him. At the wedding, Charles stumbles into the room late, awkward, apologetic, and immediately more alive than he looks in his ordinary routines. Weddings do that to him. They make him funny and restless, like a man who enjoys the performance of romance from the edge of the dance floor without ever believing he belongs at the center. Then he meets Carrie. Carrie is American, beautiful, direct, and unlike the women Charles usually circles around. She is not timid, not impressed by English awkwardness, and not especially interested in pretending she feels less than she does. From the moment they start talking, there is a spark that makes the whole room feel slightly rearranged. Charles flirts in the hesitant, verbal way he does best. Carrie answers with a confidence that both attracts and unnerves him. They spend the evening talking, dancing, and throwing off the sort of conversation that makes strangers feel abruptly familiar. Then they sleep together. That one night matters because it feels easy in a way nothing else in Charles's emotional life does. He wakes up in the morning both delighted and alarmed, already trying to joke his way around the fact that he likes her more than he can manage cleanly. Carrie, however, is not building fantasies. She is heading off, has her own life, and does not immediately treat the night as the opening chapter of some grand romance. Charles is left standing in the emotional aftermath, already more affected than he wants to admit. The second wedding arrives later, and by then Charles has spent enough time thinking about Carrie to prove he is in trouble. He sees her again at another marriage ceremony, only now she appears on the arm of another man, Hamish, a wealthy and polished Scottish politician who looks exactly like the kind of person the world expects a woman like Carrie to end up with. Charles tries to act casual, but the sight lands hard. He thought of their meeting as accidental magic. For Carrie it was meaningful but not exclusive. She has kept moving. Even so, the chemistry between them flares up again almost immediately. They steal time together, talk privately, and fall back into that same quick current that makes Charles feel both younger and more frightened. Carrie tells him about her relationship with Hamish, and Charles, instead of saying what he really feels, hides behind humor and vague evasions. He is always almost brave and then not quite. Charles is not empty-hearted. He is simply incapable of arriving at the necessary sentence before the moment closes. That failure keeps repeating. He and Carrie end up together again, and once more the intimacy is real, but afterward he still cannot turn feeling into action. Carrie asks questions without asking them directly. Charles responds with charm instead of clarity. In his mind he is avoiding embarrassment. In reality, he is giving her no reason to trust that what exists between them can survive daylight. Then comes the funeral. Before that moment, the movie is light, fast, and full of comic movement. After it, the emotional center deepens. Gareth, the most exuberant and openly affectionate member of the group, dies suddenly. His death shocks everyone not only because it is unexpected, but because Gareth seemed to embody the very aliveness the others keep postponing. At the funeral, the reality of loss cuts through all the evasions and romantic games the characters have been using to protect themselves. Matthew's grief is especially devastating because it is so contained and so full. Through him, the film shows the seriousness of a love that was never performed for approval. Gareth and Matthew were simply together, solidly, joyfully, and without apology. Their relationship becomes a quiet contrast to Charles's emotional hesitation. Where Charles keeps circling feeling, Gareth had lived it fully while he had the chance. The funeral changes the group's emotional atmosphere. Death makes all the half-choices around them look thinner. Charles feels it too, even if he still struggles to act on it. Love is no longer just a social puzzle. It is now visibly tied to time, and time has stopped being generous. By the third wedding, the pressure on Charles has shifted. Carrie announces that she is going to marry Hamish. This is not a possibility now, it is a fact. Charles hears the news like someone watching a door close in slow motion. For once, his problem is not that he does not know what he feels. He knows exactly what he feels. The problem is that he arrived there too late. At roughly the same moment, his own life pushes him toward a marriage that feels all wrong. Henrietta, often called Duck Face by the more unkind members of the circle, has remained stubbornly attached to Charles despite every sign that he is not truly engaged with her emotionally. She is eager, sincere in her own way, and absolutely certain that what stands between them can be turned into a wedding. Charles, driven by confusion, loneliness, and a growing sense that everyone else is moving forward while he remains stalled, drifts into the engagement instead of choosing it. This is one of the most uncomfortable sections of the film because Charles is not being cruel in a dramatic way. He is being weak in a familiar one. He keeps allowing momentum to substitute for desire. He lets arrangements happen around him rather than speaking the truth early enough to save everyone pain. The wedding preparations move ahead, and Charles looks more and more like a man being dressed for his own mistake. The wedding itself is a masterpiece of emotional panic. Standing at the altar, Charles cannot even get through the vows properly. His mind wanders, his mouth betrays him, and the whole event turns into a public display of private disaster. It would be funny if it were not also sad. Henrietta can see he is not fully there. The guests can feel it. Charles himself finally reaches the edge of denial and tips over it. The marriage collapses before it is completed. That failure humiliates him, but it also does something necessary. It ends the illusion that he can simply slide into a life that does not belong to him and somehow grow into it later. He cannot. Whatever else Charles is, he is no longer capable of pretending that not choosing is harmless. Then comes the fourth wedding, and this time it is Carrie's. Hamish is exactly the kind of man who fits the occasion. Wealthy, polished, socially approved, and stable in a way Charles has never pretended to be. Watching Carrie prepare to marry him is agony for Charles because it forces him to confront the cost of his own delay. He loves her, but she is here in front of him, moving toward a life with someone else, and the world around them is full of flowers, music, and the rituals that make decisions feel final. Still, even here, the film does not rush into fantasy. Charles does not burst in with some triumphant declaration that instantly rewrites everything. He is still uncertain, still frightened, still himself. What changes is that he finally stops lying. In a rain-soaked conversation after the wedding does not quite happen as expected, he tells Carrie the truth. He tells her that he loves her, that he always has in the way that matters, and that the idea of not saying it has become worse than the risk of saying it and being refused. The scene works because it is not polished. Charles does not suddenly become a different man. He stammers, hesitates, and speaks like someone dragging honesty out of a place he has avoided for years. Carrie listens, and in that moment the whole film turns on a simple question. Is love only real when it arrives in socially approved form, or can two people choose each other without pretending to become something they are not? Carrie's answer matters because she sees Charles clearly. She knows he is messy, indecisive, and not built for the tidy mythology of marriage. But she also knows that what exists between them has survived chance, distance, mistakes, funerals, and timing bad enough to ruin lesser feelings. She does not need him to become Hamish. She needs him to stop running. So the ending does not promise the neat ceremonial future that the title keeps circling around. Instead of marching toward another official wedding, Charles and Carrie choose each other on looser, truer terms. They do not need to solve love by turning it into a formal event right away. For people like them, especially for Charles, that honesty is more meaningful than a rushed symbol would be. What makes Four Weddings and a Funeral last is the way the film understands that love often reveals itself in fragments, bad timing, and missed opportunities long before it becomes a decision. Charles spends most of the story believing his problem is commitment in the abstract. What he gradually learns is that the real issue is fear. He fears choosing wrongly, being trapped, being ridiculous, and being seen too clearly. Those fears keep him passive until life itself starts forcing clarity on him. The Four Weddings are not just romantic set pieces. Each one becomes a mirror. At one wedding he discovers desire. At another he discovers loss. At another he discovers the cost of cowardice. At the last he finally discovers what it means to speak before the chance disappears. And the funeral in the middle gives the whole story its true weight by reminding everyone that love is not an intellectual exercise. It is temporary by nature because life is temporary too. The supporting group matters for the same reason. They are not decorative friends. They are the emotional world Charles lives inside. Through them, the movie shows different forms of devotion, loneliness, resilience, and compromise. Gareth and Matthew embody the seriousness and sweetness of a partnership fully lived. Fiona embodies the pain of loving someone who never arrives where you need them to. Tom and the others fill the film with the sense that adult friendship is its own kind of survival system, especially when romance becomes ridiculous. So Four Weddings and a Funeral ends exactly where it should, not with certainty but with courage. Charles does not become a new man overnight. Carrie does not become a fantasy. The world around them is still messy, funny, sad, and completely uninterested in clean timing. But after all the ceremonies, all the missed chances, and all the grief, one thing finally becomes simple. Love means nothing if you keep postponing the moment you tell the truth. And once Charles finally does, his life can begin in earnest.